James DeBello. You've probably seen his face 100 times and never known his name. Tonight, I'm going to tell you the story most people skipped right past, the untold biography of James DeBello, the guy who stole scenes, then quietly disappeared. Or did he? Let's start at the beginning. Before the crazy eyebrows, before the cult movies, before the jokes. James DeBello was born in Hartford, Connecticut in 1980. Far away from Hollywood, far away from red carpets, far away from the idea that one day his face would be attached to some of the most quoted teen movies of the late 90s and early 2000s. He wasn't born into the industry, no famous parents, no golden connections, just a kid in New England who would grow up in a time when late-night cable, VHS tapes, and teen comedies were starting to rule pop culture. At some point, that kid made a decision. He wasn't going to watch movies, he was going to be in them. So he left. He moved into the chaos, Los Angeles, the city where every waiter has a headshot, every stranger is writing a script, and every other person thinks they're the next big thing. Most people drown in that, but James, he leaned into his difference. He didn't look like the polished, perfect, center stage leading man. He had sharp features, expressive eyes, a kinetic, unpredictable energy. He wasn't built to be generic hot guy number 3. He was built to be unforgettable, even in the background. He started doing what almost every actor does: auditions, rejections, small roles, blink and you miss it appearances. But something happens when you show up in the right place at the right time with the right face. In the late 90s, Hollywood was obsessed with a certain kind of movie: high school comedies, college comedies, teen movies with soundtracks that defined an era. And into that wave walked James DeBello. He started popping up. Little roles, side characters, weirdos, goofballs, the guys nobody was supposed to take seriously, but people remembered him. Then came a movie that would change a lot of careers and permanently stamp his face into pop culture: Idle Hands, 1999, a horror comedy about a lazy teenager whose hand gets possessed by a demon, starring Devon Sawa, Seth Green, Jessica Alba. And then there's James. Mick. Scruffy. Funny. Stoner best friend. Then undead stoner best friend. He wasn't the lead. He wasn't supposed to be the focus. But every time he was on screen, something happened. You laughed. You looked. He had this ability to make stupidity feel like an art form, a kind of chaos that felt weirdly familiar. Like that one kid from school who always went too far, but you loved him anyway. Idle Hands didn't explode in theaters. It came out weeks after a national tragedy, when horror and comedy were suddenly a touchy mix. But then, something else happened. The movie didn't die. It lived. Late-night cable, DVBs, word of mouth. Suddenly, Idle Hands became a cult classic. And in the center of so many people's favorite scenes, James DeBello. From there, he started to appear in a series of movies that defined a generation of kids who grew up on sleepovers, cheap pizza, and whatever was on TV at 2 in the morning. Cabin Fever, Detroit Rock City, American Pie, and of course, Scary Movie 2. If you've seen it, you remember one thing: the Take My Strong Hand scene, an absurd, over-the-top, unforgettable gag. And there, attached to that chaos, is James DeBello, screaming, reacting, amplifying the madness like only he could. He built a career on being memorable in the margins: the best friend, the side dude, the class clown, the oddball, the one-liner king, the guy you quoted even if you had no idea what his actual name was. But here's the thing Hollywood rarely admits: being unforgettable in small roles can be a blessing and a curse. Typecasting is real. Once the machine decides what you are, it's very hard to convince it otherwise. James DeBello became that guy: the stoner, the slacker, the loud friend, the comic relief. Audiences loved him for it. Producers wanted him for it. But if you keep playing the same note forever, eventually the song gets old. And behind that funny face, there's a real human being. Someone who, like every actor, has quiet days, doubts, and dreams that go beyond just getting the next laugh. In the early 2000s, things were good. He was working steadily. TV shows, movies, independent projects. He was doing what so many aspiring actors never get to do. He was making a living. On screen. But fame is a strange thing. When you're not the lead, you're visible, but you're not famous. People recognize you, but they can't name you. They shout your character's catchphrase, but they don't know your story. They love the scene, they forget the person. That's the invisible line many character actors live on, and James lived there for years. Casting directors knew him. Fans of certain movies knew him, but outside of that, silence. Then, slowly, things changed. Hollywood trends moved on. The teen comedies faded. Superhero movies took over. Big franchises, shared universes, billion-dollar box office expectations. The weird, raunchy, low to mid-budget comedies that gave people like James a playground started to vanish. And with them, many of the faces that made those movies special also began to slip out of the mainstream spotlight. You probably didn't notice. You grew up, you got jobs, you stopped staying up until 2 in the morning watching reruns. But the people whose faces kept you company on those nights, they noticed. Work slowed, the roles offered changed, the calls came less often. This is the part of the story most biographies skip, the quiet years. The almost famous years. The hey, whatever happened to that guy years. James DeBello didn't headline blockbusters. He didn't suddenly become the next big dramatic Oscar contender. He did something both less glamorous and more human. He kept going. He said yes to smaller films, to independent projects, to things that didn't trend on social media. He worked with up-and-coming directors who were trying to figure out their own voices. He showed up on sets that didn't have trailers the size of houses. No explosions, no capes, no giant press tours. Just people making stuff, making stories, on a smaller scale, out of the spotlight. He kept doing the thing that started all of this in the first place. He acted. If you look closely at his career, you start to see something. He never tried to contort himself into someone he wasn't. He wasn't suddenly pretending to be a perfectly polished leading man. He leaned into his uniqueness, into his timing, his offbeat presence. He took the thing that made him stand out at the beginning, and he never apologized for it. But because those projects weren't giant studio films, most of the internet moved on. We live in an era where if something doesn't show up in your algorithm, it might as well not exist. But art still happens when the feed is quiet, and James DeBello has been part of that world. Smaller sets, stranger scripts, different kinds of stories, away from the frenzy that defined his earlier roles. That's the visible part of his journey, the part we can track, credit by credit. The invisible part? That's the one anyone who has ever chased a dream can feel. Imagine this. You're in your late teens, early 20s. You start landing roles. You work with big names. You're in movies that people still quote decades later. You're on posters. You're on set with actors who go on to win awards, to headline franchises, to become household names. The world feels huge and possible. And then, slowly, that wave passes you by. Others rocket up. You level out. You don't disappear, but you're not being pushed, paid, and promoted the way some of your co-stars are. What do? Do you cling to that early era, endlessly chasing a version of yourself that belonged to a very specific time in Hollywood? Or do you quietly reshape your life around a different kind of success? For James, the choice shows up in where he's been. He never stopped entirely. He never turned his back on acting. But he also didn't seem obsessed with reinventing himself as some completely different archetype just to stay loudly relevant. He accepted being a working actor, the thing most people say they want when they start, the thing that sounds so small once you've tasted a little bit of fame. And this is where his story becomes more than just one guy's filmography. Because when we talk about Hollywood, we talk about the stars, the biggest names, the leads, the people in the front of the poster. But movies, shows, and the stories we love are held together by people like James DeBello, the ones who come in for 3 scenes and steal all of them, the ones whose energy makes the world feel real, the ones who don't get action figures but get remembered in cult corners of the internet. They are the glue. the secret spine of your favorite era of movies, and their lives rarely get told. So let's linger for a second on what James actually brought to the screen. Think back to the roles you've seen him in. He's almost never cool in a normal way. He's loud. He's strange. He pushes the joke further than seems safe. He commits hard. That kind of comedy takes courage, because if it doesn't land, you look ridiculous. You're not protected by handsome stoicism or mysterious quiet. You are out there, full volume, a human risk. And yet, in film after film, he did exactly that. He went big. And more often than not, it worked. People laughed, they remembered him, they quoted him, they imitated his characters years later. He carved out a space as the chaos agent in the corner of the frame. But also, if you rewatch carefully, there are softer beats. Moments where the clown mask slips just a little. A look, a hesitation, a line delivered not just for the laugh, but with a trace of something sadder. Because that's the truth behind many funny people. Comedy is often built on the tension between the ridiculous and the painfully real. James danced in that space. He gave you both. You just might not have realized it at the time, because the joke was louder than the emotion. Now we get to the uncomfortable truth. There is no giant scandal, no shocking meltdown, no viral clip of James DeBello spiraling out of control. He didn't explode. He faded, quietly, like most careers do. And that's exactly why his story is worth telling. Not because he burned the world down, but because he represents something almost nobody talks about, the middle class of fame. The actors who had just enough success to taste it, but not enough for the world to follow every step they take for the rest of their lives. We love the extremes. The nobody who becomes a global superstar, the superstar who loses everything. But in between those two myths, there are thousands of stories like James's. People who gave us characters we still love, then had to figure out who they are when the spotlight shifts. So who is James DeBello now? He's an actor with a body of work that reached millions, even if many of them never learned his name. He's a reminder that impact doesn't always look like headlining Marvel movies or breaking box office records. Sometimes, impact is smaller, quieter. A line you quoted with your friends in middle school, a face you recognized instantly in a random late-night movie, a performance that made a forgettable film oddly unforgettable. Sometimes, that's enough. And maybe, on a personal level, that's healthier than the alternative. Because here's something people rarely admit when they talk about fame. Fame takes. It takes privacy. It takes pressure. It takes your right to fail quietly. James DeBello never reached the kind of superstardom that swallows people whole. He hovered in that strange middle territory where you can still walk down the street most days without being mobbed, but you can also look up and see your younger self frozen on screens around the world. In a way, that's a kind of balance, even if it wasn't the one young actors dream about. This is the untold biography of James DeBello, not because we dug up every detail of his personal life, but because we did something almost nobody bothers to do. We stopped. We looked back. We asked, who was that guy who made those movies feel the way they did? We followed the thread past the punchlines and the memes. And on the other end, we found a working actor, a craftsman, a face of a generation of movies that helped shape our sense of humor, our references, our memories. He didn't become a headline. He became something else, a piece of nostalgia, a part of your past you didn't realize had a name. James DeBello. So the next time you stumble on an old DVD, the next time you see idle hands on some tiny streaming service, the next time Scary Movie 2 is playing in the background at a party, pause for a second when he shows up. Remember that behind the quick laugh and the goofy expression is a whole life, years of auditions, years of work, years of being almost famous. Remember that not every story has to end in triumph or tragedy to be worth telling. Some stories are worth telling because they are human, because they are real, because they are ours. This was the untold story of James DeBello, the guy you always recognized, even if you never knew his name. Until now.